The Play Today Next Gen NFT collection is an Australian first. It's your chance to buy a digital collectible of one of golf's rising stars. 100% of all proceeds go directly to the player, so you can help a young golfer chase their dream. Head to playtodaynft.com. Hello and welcome to episode 72 of The Thing About Golf, our ongoing quest here at Golf Australia magazine to uncover what it is that draws people to this most maddening of all the games. I'm Rod Murray and I'm joined on the line for the second consecutive episode by my extremely busy colleague John Huggan. Huggy's been doing a lot of heavy lifting these past few weeks because there's been lots of big-time tournament golf played in his backyard. And Huggy, with all that content that you've generated, the time-sensitive nature of some of it in particular, our lucky listeners get back-to-back doses of you. Welcome. Looking forward to your chat today with Eddie Pepperell. You introduced him in the podcast as the most interesting man in golf. Is that overstating? It's pretty close, isn't it? He's up there.
Well, yeah, he might be on the podium, but it might be a struggle to call him the most interesting person in golf. But he's certainly interesting. Let's put it that way.
He's a thinker, a deep thinker about topics and issues outside of golf, which is rare. We've had a lot of great golf thinkers on the show. Harrington was fabulous. Jose in the last episode was extremely popular. A lot of people really enjoyed that. I've had a lot of good feedback about that, and I hope you have too. A little bit like Mike Clayton in some ways, Greg Turner. He thinks about things deeply well away from golf as well, doesn't he? Which is perhaps one of the things that separates him.
Well, I'm not sure that it does him the 100% is to his benefit. This thinking too much business is it's not really what golfers should be doing.
No,
especially about non-golfing subjects. I mean, Eddie's career as we first to acknowledge, I think, has been up and down and up and down. We did this interview that we're about to listen to at the Fairmont Hotel just outside St Andrews on the Monday afternoon before the tournament, whose name escapes me. All the European
Tour. It's one of the Kazoo events, isn't it?
Me at the moment.
Yeah, it's one of the Kazoo events.
Yeah, Kazoo. I think that's the one. Yeah. And then he went on to finish second.
Yeah.
A few days later. So I did text him on the Monday morning afterwards. I said, do you want to talk every Monday from now on? But he wasn't up for that, sadly.
No, indeed. He's got lots of strong opinions as well, Huggy, and I think you pointed out to him quite early in the interview. He's done a lot of writing, a bit like Meg McLaren. They're the two players that spring to my mind, who write not just about golf. Lots of golfers write stuff about golf. Really quite personal and very revealing stuff. Takes a fair bit of courage to do that. What did he say about that?
Well, yeah, I mean, as I put it to him, that he lets us inside his head more than most golfers. And I'd be the first to say I don't agree with everything he's got to say about the political situation in the world.
Doesn't sound like you, Huggy,
and all the rest of it.
Normally, you're so agreeable.
Well, yeah, I didn't let him know quite to that extent during the interview, but yeah, he thinks about stuff and he lets it out. I mean, as a journalist, I'm not sure we can ask for any more than that. He's a great listen. I enjoyed talking to him. I always do. Even when I don't agree with him. But yeah, he's good on his golf. I mean, the ups and downs of his career speak for themselves. But I think if he could ever get his head in the right place all the time, I think he would be a better player. I mean, his technique, he fights his drive, and his driving is not very good relative to his competition. He uses a lot of 2 woods and 3 woods off the tee, but he's long enough to get away with that. And I mean, second place in that tournament was a step up from where he's been recently. It wasn't the biggest event in the world. It was pretty much I hate to use the word second rate, but it wasn't
second tier.
It wasn't the biggest event. Yeah, but definitely a step in the right direction for him, and he'll have kept his card on the basket. He finished in the top 20 again in Wales just at the weekend there, so he's obviously heading in the right direction again, which is nice to see.
Yeah, he strikes as the sort of player who will play well in runs. He did a couple of years ago. He had a real run, a really strong run, got to the Players' Championship. He might have played the Masters even, got himself that high. He feels like the sort of player who'll do that kind of thing. He's been off the boil for a long time, but you would expect that he'll be on the boil now.
Yeah.
Despite the crazy drills.
This how far he'd fallen this year was it 2 or 3 years ago he was third in the Players, and I think the week after the Players this year he was playing in something in Kenya and missing the cut. So that's a long way down, and he didn't have a full card this year either. He's been relying on invites and past champion exemptions and all that kind of stuff. But next year it'll be normal service resumed, I think.
Might that have been the wake up call he needed?
Well, possibly, but he's been there before. I mean, it's not the first time he's lost his card. I think he blew one out of bounds at Lasso in Portugal 2 years ago to
I think I remember.
miss out. Yeah, I mean, and was in tears afterwards and all the rest of it. But I don't think he was in tears this time round. But I mean, like I say, I mean, for somebody as good as he is to be losing the card, I mean, if you've got a full card at the start of a season, certainly in Europe, and you can play basically whatever you want, if you lose your card, you've played rubbish.
Yeah, that's really bad.
It's really difficult to do that if you're a good player.
Yeah. He is a bit more obsessed with golf than I thought he would be.
Yeah, well, I think he disguises that by talking about other stuff. But yeah, I mean, his golf is very important to him, as is his dogs. I mean, he's big on the dog front. If you follow him on social media, he's very funny on that. He's not quite Andrew Cotter with the dogs, but he's
nobody is.
He's
nobody
close.
is.
He's close.
He hasn't got the right dogs.
Yeah, I mean, Eddie's just a good guy to sit down and talk to. He's interesting. He makes you think about things that you haven't thought about before. I mean, that's a good conversation, I think.
Yeah. For a Scot to say that about a Pom, it must be good. So let's get on with it and let the listeners have a listen. Thanks for joining us, Huggy.
Okay, my pleasure.
Okay, welcome to the latest edition of the Thing About Golf podcast. My guest this week is one of the most interesting people, I think, is the description that's always labelled on Eddie Pepperell. Eddie, welcome to the Thing About Golf. I always start with the first question, is always the same. What was the thing about golf for you?
Oh, originally, I had no choice. I was only 4, so my dad took me and my brother to the range, and that was that. So obviously that's going back 27 years for me now. So I've not got many memories of my formative years, I have to say. But it was, fell in love with the game. I did fall in love pretty young. I was that in football, and I loved the kind of individual aspect of golf more than anything. So, that was it.
When did the bug really bite, though? I mean, as you say, people always start off, they're just kind of mucking about, but there's always a point where, right, you just, you think, this is it for me, sort of thing.
Yeah, I think probably, well, I mean, as young as, from memory, 11 or 12, I was pretty good. I was a good kid. Yeah. So, I played in loads of competitions at a young age and did well. So, you'd have to speak to my mum or dad about, they would have observed when the bug kicked in, obviously, but, from some of the noises and the things they say, I had that kind of attitude of, not wanting to put clubs down, wanting to just go and do it all the time from a very young age. Yeah. So clearly it was in me.
Yeah. At what point did you think, I'm really pretty good at this?
Well, maybe when I started beating my brother, it was the only thing I ever beat him at, and it did take me a while. But and then when I started playing kind of regional and national competitions, in fact, I remember playing a tournament called the Wee Wonders up here in Scotland at St Andrews on the little Balgove course, actually, and beating Jonathan Bell, who was the kid at the time. And I beat him, just pipped him, and won the Wee Wonders at 12. And that was I would have thought I was the kiddie at that point.
Yeah, I mean, 12. I mean, what sort of handicap were you at that point?
I think I got down to about 5 from memory, age 12, which I don't know much about the modern handicap system, but I'm guessing that's +5. In this day and age.
Yeah.
But no, I got down pretty low at the time, and and then I kind of, as I got a bit older, 13, 14, I started winning more like Faldo Series events and the Reed Trophy, which was the national under 14 tournaments. So I still maintain that I was a better golfer at kind of 15, 16 than I am now, really.
Oh, right. Well,
relatively speaking.
Expand on that a little bit.
Certainly, relatively speaking. At least that's funny the way you kind of imagine or think back. I seemed pretty cool having the ball under great control at that age and being a good little chipper, a good putter, and the game was just simple. You plod it down the fairway and you just hit plenty of greens.
You're not thinking technique at that point, really.
No, I was too much. No, it was the pre dark days. So but no, I loved the game, and I practiced hard. That was one thing I always did. I loved being on my own. I loved just chipping and practicing, and I'd spend all day doing it, all summer holidays. It was all I ever did.
I was kind of that same child, not to the same level of play, I don't think, but you spend most of your time at the far end of a field with a bag of golf balls and a pile of balls and chipping around and whatever. You're missing out on things, especially as a teenager. I mean, there's a lot of things you give up to do that. I mean, were you aware of that at the time, or did you not really bother?
It was one of those, I just never knew what those alternative things were, and I had no interest in them, whether it be girls or going out with friends or anything, I just never had any interest. Although I met Jen when I was 16, which, I've been with her ever since. So, but other than that, it was, I had no interest in anything other than my golf, really, John. And, that's kind of how it's always been with me. There's golf, is me, it's kind of feels like half of me, it's who you kind of identify as, really.
Were you kind of known as the golfer at school and things, were you?
Absolutely. I was even bullied at times, and, because it wasn't the coolest sport to play.
No.
I was the golfer. That was how everyone knew me. And, even at a young age, my school let me, 15, 16, they let me drop 3 or 4 GCSEs to focus on golf, and they were very good about things. So, it was kind of, once I reached 14, 15 and I was traveling around the world at that point, everyone just, that was kind of how they associated me, just with golf, yeah.
I looked at your amateur record. I mean, you pretty much ticked all the usual boxes. You wore all the usual blazers on the way up. Yeah. What are your kind of memories of those, team days, if you like? I look back on that kind of thing with great fondness.
Yeah, the further away I get from that, me too, especially the team aspect of it. Obviously professional golf, you just rarely play team stuff, and I'm not even sure the Majestics would make up for the team element that's lacking. But, for sure, it's the trips away, it's spending time with friends, having good fun and doing the things that kind of teenage boys, naughty things that you do, and just the mischievous elements to it all.
Any examples?
Oh, I've got a number. I was kicked out, in fact, of the England squad for 6 months for one of my, I did a prank phone call. I did this poor lad called Jake Shepherd, who was a good player, but not, maybe he wasn't quite in the full team. And I, once was in a room with Tommy Fleetwood and Gary King, and I think Darren Rennick was the name of the other lad. And I, pretended to be the chief selector, who at the time was called Anthony Abrahams was his name, very posh, right, old English man. And I just called this lad Jake up, pretending to be Anthony, and kind of put on the accent as best I could. He fell for it. I told him that he'd been selected to travel to South Africa for 2 weeks in January, and not only that, he was going to be the captain, and he was very excited. And
so cruel.
I was so cruel, and we held it for 40 minutes, and then his dad managed to kind of, he caught along with it the next day, called up, I got figured out, and that was me out the squad for a little while. So that was just one.
That's kind of an appropriate punishment, I would say. I mean, it is cruel when you look back at it. My goodness.
Yeah, it's funny, isn't it? I didn't feel like it was cruel at the time, but I suppose now it is cruel, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's what teenagers do, though. It's unthinking. I mean, it seemed like a good laugh, didn't it?
And it was, well, from my perspective anyway.
Yeah, I think I've talked to you about this before. I always look back at your the England team that won the European Team Championship in 2010. I think there's 5 of the 6 of you went on to win on what is now the DP World Tour, the European Tour. I mean, what are your memories of that? And I think did you not beat, was it David Lingworth?
Yeah.
That day in the final, the Swedish lad?
I did. We came back from, I think, 2-0 down in the morning to win, if not every singles. I think we won almost every single match in the afternoon in Sweden. In the final, it was brilliant.
Run me through the others who were in that team, just for the record.
Well, I think it was the Tommy 5 you referred to would be Tommy, myself, Chris Paisley. I suspect Tom Lewis would have been there.
Yes.
And there will be one other who I am missing, which is bad.
So am I now.
I know Billy Hemstock was there.
He's the one that didn't win.
Yeah. Billy was a nice lad from down in Devon. But I can't remember the 6th, which is bad.
I should have written this down.
Yeah.
It's bad reporting by me. So,
But no, that was a great memory. Another good memory I had, actually, we were talking about this the other night at dinner with my parents, was I beat Matteo Manacero on the 20th hole one year in Slovenia in the European Boys in about the quarterfinals, and he threw his putter about 60 yards. He missed an 8-footer to extend the match.
Right.
Threw his putter about 50 yards back down the fairway, and Alberto Benaggi, who was the coach of the team, legend, he was there, and it was all a bit massive commotion. And but I had some great matches growing up with people like Matteo, David Lingworth, Oscar Sharp, just some brilliant matches. And of course, match play back then, that was it, wasn't it? And it was very different, obviously, again, to what we see now as professionals. So quite different, but a lot of fun memories.
Yeah, I mean, at what point did you? I mean, obviously, inevitably, you start comparing yourself when the names you just mentioned. Tom Lewis and Tommy Fleetwood and those guys are. They've gone on to have decent careers, more than decent. Mm. At what point? Where are you vis-a-vis them at that point? And are you thinking, I can do this, or is there any doubt creeping in?
Yeah, I mean, I never felt like I was I never felt like I was going to be the first guy to achieve something better than I was achieving, and I think Tommy Fleetwood and Tom were the two guys who probably always did that. They were always at the forefront of the next step in terms of our generation. And that, I don't know why I felt that way. It was just kind of the way I felt at the time. So, then when you start to see Tom, who won out on tour, Tommy then break through, obviously it did make me think and realize, well, if they do it, then of course you can do it, right? That's the natural way it works. So,
but you never felt you were the best player on the team.
I kind of didn't, not because I didn't feel like I had a lot of potential. Just, I don't know. I just had so much, admiration for their games. And I felt that they both at the time, especially hit the ball so much better than I did. That was my kind of association, I suppose, with what I thought you had to do to, really make it out here on tour. So, those two guys had that in abundance, whereas I didn't feel like I did. I knew I had a strong mentality and a good short game and character, but, obviously you do need a bit of the full package to become a world-class player, obviously. So, but those two guys were always the two who I felt like I looked up to the most.
Mm-hmm. Did you have a plan B at this point? I mean, were you one of those guys how were you at school and were you passing exams and things just in case, or where did you fit in that scheme of things?
Yeah, I didn't have a plan B, and I was always of the opinion, don't have a plan B. Golf was, there was never an option of failure for me.
Right.
And as I got a little older, as I began to reflect a bit more on the game and indeed mature a little bit more, I was of the opinion that even if I did fail at golf, I felt like I was carrying with me the kind of level of perspective and potentially intelligence whereby even if you did fail, opportunities would open up down the road anyway. And the lessons you learn along the way in golf are, I think, they correlate nicely over to many aspects of life. So it's a very challenging endeavor ultimately to succeed as a professional golfer. And there's no harm in coming up just short. Many people do, obviously, and they go on to have many great careers in other industries, and including golf. But no, there was never another option for me, John. It was just golf. Yeah.
Your blog has always been, certainly of interest to me. I mean, you've let us inside your head to an extent that most people don't, certainly who write for a living. I'm always writing about other people. I never let people see too much of what goes on inside my head. But you've done that. At what point were you like that as a teenager? Were you introspective, kind of deep thinker? I mean, which is not necessarily the best thing for a golfer. And there's plenty of examples of guys who just free flow it, and you can get in your own way a little bit sometimes.
Yeah. I honestly don't remember what I was like, before kind of 18, and it was that age where I started reading books. I never even finished a book. I never got halfway through a book before the age of 18. And then first book I read was Lawrence Dallaglio's autobiography. And I just remember it hitting a lot of...
He's the English rugby
player. And at the time I was reading a lot of books from rugby players. None of them were golfers. It was all rugby players, or it was kind of Matthew Saeed. I think he wrote a book called Bounce back then, which, obviously was...
There's a common factor in all sports, though, mentally, I think.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it was actually recognizing those similarities that kind of ignited a sense of, I don't know what, but certainly that I was related in some way to them. And if they were successful, then I could be too. Johnny Wilkinson as well, he had some very insightful, comments. He wrote a book with his coach called Steve Black, which was a great book from memory. And I just kind of dived in big time to some of these books, and it clearly opened up a piece of my mind at the time. Like you say, it was much more introspective. And it was a good period where I felt like I was uncovering many thoughts, some beliefs, and I felt like I needed an outlet to at least get them out of my brain. And that's where the blog came in. And, it was a big step for me at the time from memory. I seem to recall I might have been washing up some dishes at the golf club at Drayton Park, where I used to do a few hours every fortnight. And I remember telling my dad, maybe, or the chef, that I was going to do it. And they were like, oh, it's silly, or probably took the piss out of me. Sorry, if we're not allowed to swear on this podcast.
You can say that. They can say that all the time in Australia. Don't worry about it.
And I just took the plunge and did it. And it kind of evolved a little bit. And as time's gone on, I've certainly written far less over the last few years, simply because my thoughts have veered away almost entirely from the game of golf. And though, I think a tremendous amount about lots of things, rarely is it actually about golf. And so I just feel like there's no point me writing it, because most people wouldn't have no interest in what I think about, the world outside of golf.
Well, off the top of my head, I mean, you'd probably be accused of you having less credibility talking about whatever than certainly relative to golf. I mean, which is something that you're obviously very good at. So
yeah, there is that. And of course, I witnessed some of that during the pandemic, where I, dived into COVID a bit. And, listen, I don't think credibility should disqualify, in terms of qualifications, shouldn't disqualify anyone from having an opinion, because some judgments are actually very prescient over time, even if they're qualified or not. It's,
I just meant you'd be accused of that.
No,
it didn't necessarily mean that you didn't have anything relevant to say.
Yeah, no, okay, you're right. But, it would.
So what sort of subjects have you delved into? I mean, what occupies the mind of Eddie Pepperell when he's not on the golf course? There's
really only ever been one thing that's kind of persisted.
It's not sex, is it? We can't go there.
I'm afraid not. It's kind of been markets and economics, the wider world of macroeconomics, really. That's been the one thing that's persisted over time, and probably now 8-9 years. Which is quite unusual. For me, I did have little bits of, a few passions or interests over time, but they went away as quickly as they came. But this one has certainly, just stuck with me for a long, long time. So, and especially in the last year or two, it's grown much, stronger. So yeah, I'm thinking ahead a bit at the moment. I have been lately, doing quite a lot of reflecting, and obviously the Live Golf which we'll get onto, has furthered those reflections. And I am thinking about doing some additional stuff moving forward to kind of, I think, satisfy my, let's just say, intellectual dissatisfaction with golf not because golf isn't interesting and it isn't a puzzle that I think is worth solving, but my mind tends to spend most of its day thinking about other stuff. So
Can we see you running for political office at some point?
I don't think so.
You wouldn't be the first golfer. Peter Thompson did it back in Australia.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
I don't think so, but I'm certainly in the curiosity part at this point, and I'm not really interested in politics too much. But well,
economics runs into politics,
of course, of course, and that would be the economics and understanding the business side of things more, of how things work, is something that I'm interested in moving forward. Yeah.
And yet you didn't last too long on the tournament committee at the European Tour. I remember talking to you when you did it, and you were very eager, it seemed to me at the time, to delve into the inner workings of how things went on in the tour, but you didn't last very long. What was the story there?
I was on there for about a year and a half. I did resign, just because the tour made the decision that, to pay a few players quite a lot of money to turn up to play a Rolex Series event just to keep the points going, so they didn't get fined by Rolex under the agreement. So I thought, well, that if we're at that point, that doesn't seem like a particularly sustainable policy, and I'm not, and I'm fundamentally against the tour paying players. I've always been against that. I remember writing that in the blog, I think years and years ago.
We can debate that in a minute. I've got views on that. Yeah.
So, and it did come at the expense, prize funds were then slashed across a couple of upcoming tournaments. And I figured, well, if a few guys are getting, say, €1 million and we're getting that coming out of future prize funds, that's not something that I think I stand for. And I've always believed that. So it was just in me, standing up for what I felt like I had the integrity to stand up for what I've always felt. And,
so it was a one issue thing you resigned on? Yeah,
it really was. And, that was that. So I said it in an email to the guys and I came off. But I enjoyed my time. I don't think I think the Players Committee is an interesting place. Of late it would have been interesting, certainly, although, the majority of the big decisions clearly are not made on the Players Committee. They're made at the board level.
Should they be?
Exactly. And I would entirely agree with that, especially when it comes to things like Live. We elect an executive like Keith, to come in and make those decisions, and we have to put our faith and judgment in that individual.
Did you have to, I sometimes smile when I hear about what the players moan and groan about. I mean, you're a privileged bunch.
Yeah.
And some of the things that seem to, energize their negativity always just makes me laugh. I mean, was there some of that involved? Did you see some of that?
Yeah, there was a lot of that, courtesy cars or food not quite being up to scratch. And I'm totally on your page. I thought this is small fry in the grand scheme of things. Let's get the things that really matter, right, if we can. And also it opened my eyes to the challenges that the tour faces, commercially. It's just a very difficult, I think it's been a very difficult time to raise investment, especially obviously we've had the pandemic and that's made it even harder. So, but no, I enjoyed my time and, I would consider maybe going back on it at some point down the road, but, it's not something I'm interested in doing at the moment, no.
We need to talk a little bit about your form. You've been up and down and up and, all over the place in terms of, quality of your golf. You're cardless at the moment, technically. Is that fair to say? Is that how it works? I mean, it's a kind of grey area, isn't it? That sometimes, I mean, you were outside the top, whatever it is, at the end of last year, but you're still getting plenty of starts.
Yeah, so effectively I've taken what would have been Q School. I think I would have taken number one card at Q School, effectively, or number two. So that's I suppose the category that I've, I've gone into because of obviously we haven't had Q School again last year. But it has been a very odd few years. I think my form started going downhill in 2019. As I reflect on it, really from the midpoint of 2019, I didn't play that well.
Mm-hmm. And yet you've just been third in the Players' Championship.
Yeah, I mean, I had some good results at the start of 2019, although I would say those results kind of were probably made better by confidence and masked some underlying flaws. And they came to the fore, I think, more in the middle and to late part of 2019. And then obviously the pandemic came early 2020. So, I think I entered the pandemic in a worsening place with my technique, certainly.
Right.
And then took 6 weeks off, didn't pick a club up. Next time I picked a club up, it was almost like looking at a different person. Not only because was I swinging it worse, but I lost a lot of weight during the pandemic because I got a lot healthier and took care of my health a lot more. So it was as I look back now, it was almost like, felt like starting again. And I had a movement pattern that was very different to what I was used to. And I was hitting all kinds of bizarre shots from 2020 and I would hit a shank a week. And I've almost have been up to this point. I've hit a few this year. And that's what's characterized my game. I think, ironically, especially in the last 12 months, or certainly the last 9 months, when I lost my card in 2016, I was completely lost off the tee. I couldn't hit a driver. But the last 9 months, I've actually been quite good off the tee and play a lot. So the game's not felt particularly stressful, but I've been really poor relative to my past and what you should be doing out here from the fairway in and around the greens. Yeah. And obviously that's the difference. And so I feel more demoralized by some of the stuff I've been witnessing in my game as opposed to lost where I used to feel in 2016. So it's just been as I look at it on the camera and I observe the differences between now and a few years ago, my game and my swing and my body positions have changed dramatically to the point where it's kind of been dealing with a whole new set of problems. And, I've had a very difficult time kind of figuring them out. I will say, I think I'm heading in the right direction now, but, it's been a weird period.
Yeah, I mean, I was, back in the first card losing stage, I always thought that my image of you was relative to your competition. You weren't a great driver, but you were a beautiful iron player. And you reminded me a bit of Bernard Gallagher in that respect. He back in the day, he was the same kind. His driving was really poor relative to his competition, but certainly inside 90 yards from the hole, he was just about the best in the world. Right. I'm not sure you were quite the same as that, but your iron play was what stood out for me. I mean, has that changed?
Yeah, that has changed. I wouldn't even say I tried to address my driving. I wasn't a good driver, but I wasn't at the same time. I mean, I could get the ball in play. And
it's all relative, I know, but yeah.
Yeah. And when I think back to even 2018, when obviously I had my best year, I mean, I used my 3-wood a lot. So, even then, it wasn't like I was still winning tournaments, hitting driver maybe 20% of the time. So you wouldn't characterize me as a great driver of the ball then. Having said that, I wasn't terrible. So, but no, I have gotten better off the tee. I mean, I haven't used a driver for over a year. I've been using the mini driver. And my stats have been had a couple bad weeks at the start of this year, but by and large, I've been in the green off the tee, which is unheard of for me. You know, when I go back to my best years, I was always in the red off the tee, and I was almost always in the red on the greens. But from the fairway and around the greens, I was usually often the best in the field. And that's been just a complete 180 where I've, you know, my bad rounds this year have become where I've lost 4 approach play or 3 around the green. And that kind of stuff is a whole new.
Well, that's very difficult to deal with, I would think, in terms of just how you think.
Yeah, it's a nightmare, you know, because, I mean, I've shanked a lot of bunker shots. So then you think, well, you're not feeling comfortable in the bunkers. So then you're standing over the 7-iron in the middle of the fairway, which should be a fairly easy shot, but you're kind of guiding away. So obviously the impact it has on psychology throughout the bag is negative. And yeah, I've just developed a movement pattern that's been very, very challenging to play good golf with an iron. It's simple as that, really. You know.
Yeah. Is it more difficult for somebody, and I'm presuming here, I think, that you're more of an artistic temperament than scientific approach to the game. I mean, is it more difficult when something does go wrong when you've got that, you know, how much do you delve into technique? How much do you talk to a coach? I mean, because it's what came naturally has to be looked at. And that's always to me that would strike me as probably the most difficult aspect of it.
Yeah, I mean, I've always tried to, I remember having a chat to Nick Doherty about this. And I mean, when I played some of my best golf, it was off the back of formulating drills, coming up with drills that would, to the outside person, look extremely complicated and technical. But all they ever were designed to do for me was to just create a movement pattern. So when I used to then swing, I was just trying to create the feel or recreate the feel that the drill gave me. So there was a lot of thought that went into the drill, but then it created a lot of feel. So then when I swung the club, people, I think, would have looked at my swing and thought, oh, that's a natural swing. It plays with a lot of feel. But there was an incredible amount of thought that went into that.
Right.
But the end product was feel. So to me, you know, I remember talking to Nick Doherty about this because that is an important distinction to make, because players who become paralyzed, they're overthinking it. But I never used to overthink the golf shot, but I used to think to the, you know, there's a decimal point, let's say, on the drill. You know, I could separate a drill into 6 pieces. Right. Indeed, the week before I won the British Masters, I had a drill that I used to call the 6-piece symphony to my coach, Simon Shanks.
One of the great names in golf.
One of the great names in golf. Yeah. Now, obviously, you know, symphony is a bit of a strong term to use to describe a golf swing, but I mean, it was just, that's what I did. But, you know, I will get very technical on it. And this is why I've kind of historically had confidence in myself to figure it out, because I do think I'm smart enough to see the patterns, to observe it and to ultimately correct it. But, I'll say the last couple of years have probably been characterized by me experiencing a whole new pattern of movement, which I found difficult to understand and deal with, and also focus as well. You know, my focus hasn't been as strong on golf as it historically once was because of, you know, a number of things. So I think those two things combined is what's made this particularly, you know, this particular period of my poor golf drawn out. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, so where are we right now then? I mean, are you moving forward? Are you treading water? I mean, how do you see things right this minute?
I don't know. I'm either sinking or I'm moving forward. I don't think I'm treading water at this point. I think like I referred to a minute ago, things are definitely on the up from a golf perspective. I do feel like my swing's improving. Last week obviously we're now ahead of when we were recording.
You can say that and it's fine. I mean, we're sitting here at St Andrews for the Hero Championship 2 weeks after the Open.
Right. So, I just played at Hillside and had a decent week and showed some nice signs, certainly with my iron play and my short games. So, things I do think are looking up, with my game, but then obviously there's a lot else going on in the game of golf, which, over time could have, and over the near term, let's say, not even the long term, we're talking now short to medium term, could have a material impact on whether or not I do continue to sink or swim.
Mm-hmm. Where would you like to be at the end of this year? I know you're not. I've talked to you before about this. You're not a goal guy, or you've always claimed not to be. But there's got to be a target. You've got to be thinking, right, I need to get this card back fully at the end of this year, sort of thing.
Yeah, I mean,
That would be a natural thing to think, I would have thought.
Well, maybe, yeah, but I've never been. Well, I've always felt with me, whenever I've set a goal, I've always come up just short. So if my goal is just to keep my card, I think I'll lose my card.
Right. Yeah.
So for me,
you're aiming higher.
Yeah. Well, yeah, because I think I really believe in my talent and my ability, and I think if I keep on the train that I'm on at the moment and let it run, I think I can generate some great form in the next 6 months, and that could mean me winning a tournament or even two. So, all of the card talk will just take care of itself, right?
Yeah,
that's always the way I've
that's interesting. Yeah, and I was always accused of never aiming high enough, and that's probably a perfect example of that right there.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, I've always felt like, and the momentum, is an interesting thing in sport. Obviously I've created a lot of momentum to the downside with my game, but when I think back to 2018 and 2019, and again, if we go back to the comment I made earlier about the players, I had so much upward momentum at that point that my confidence that it was the momentum that was keeping the results up. It's what you see I've often referred to markets, sentiment, momentum, they can count for 20% of the upside and the downside. So they can mask negatives, and they can also mask, the underlying fundamentals. And I think, I rode that upswing nicely through the end of 2018, 2019. And I think probably the last few months, my game's actually been in quite a better place than where my results have been, because there's been a negative, momentum and sentiment internally that's been pulling my results down. I think that's now swinging a corner, and I do think I'm back on the upswing. And
it sounds like a phase that you
exactly right. Yeah. It's the cycle of just everything and everyone, and everything goes through cycles. So I think things are looking upwards for me, and then it's about I'm going to have to start creating my own momentum to the upside, and that'll then increase confidence, and then you begin to go to tournaments feeling 10% more relaxed, a bit less stressed. You let it happen, and that's just the way it goes.
Well, you're just getting out your own way, really.
Yeah, exactly right. So, but you have to create the conditions to allow yourself to get out their own way, and I've definitely done enough of that stuff. So it's just a case of doing it now, playing.
Have you talked to anybody mental side of it?
No, I've never had any. I mean, I did when I was an amateur and a junior, but after that, no, I've never really gone.
You figure it out for yourself. So.
Well, yeah, and I don't wish that to sound, like I'm.
No, that might be the best way for you. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that, I don't think.
Yeah, I think we all need help. I would have much greater concern for me if I was, if I was struggling away from the golf course psychologically, and I know there are people who are, and that would then be worrying me, and I would seek help I would hope I would seek some help, but that's kind of outside of golf. I think as it relates to golf, I've always had, I think, a pretty good ability anyway to put it into its perspective. It always sits below, the wider world for me, golf. So.
Yeah. I mean, you haven't fallen into the classic trap of, gauging your self-worth on your score, or have you?
No, I haven't. Having said that, golf does affect my mood. It is a part of me. But that's, I don't think, unnatural. I wouldn't want to bifurcate myself from that, because, often sports people or anyone who's very successful in a particular field, it's kind of who they are. I mean, they would have done it a long, long time.
Yeah,
and
you'd be less than human if it didn't affect you a little bit,
exactly,
at least,
Right. So I often find when people try to artificially detach themselves, it's pretty obvious what they're trying to do just to comfort themselves.
It doesn't ring true either.
Exactly. And, if you know me and I know me, it's the one thing that matters to me is the truth. So I'm unafraid of however low my mood could be because of my golf, or equally high because of what I achieved. That to me that's the deal you sign when you play professional golf. Yeah.
The Play Today Next Gen NFT collection is an Australian golf first. Featuring Blake Windred, Grace Kim, Harrison Crowe and Kelsey Bennett, it's your chance to buy a digital collectible of one of golf's rising stars. 100% of all proceeds go directly to the player, so you can help a young golfer chase their dream. Head to playtodaynft.com to find out more.
Before we move on from that, I wanted to ask you a bit more about the Players' Championship that you did so well in. Was there ever a temptation at that point to look at America? I mean, you thought, well, I quite fancy this, and having done so well. I mean, that's the biggest tournament on that tour, and you were right there. And you hold that ridiculous putt on the 17th, which we need to talk about as well.
Yeah, there wasn't really, John. I mean, I couldn't wait to get home. Me and Jen had been in Florida for a few weeks, and listen, I admire America. I like going there, but I wouldn't personally want to live there. So yeah, and the travel was really taking its toll on my body at that point. You know, my back wasn't in a great spot anyway, and 3 or 4 transatlantic trips, and I felt terrible. So no, America's never been a place I wanted to really play full time, and even after that good finish at the Players, nothing really changed on that front. But the Part 17 was a great memory. I mean,
yeah, just for people that haven't seen it, it's probably about 50 feet long with about 5 breaks in it, you know, up and over the hill from the front of the green. You know?
Yeah, the only good thing is I'd seen you've seen putts like that in the past. You know kind of what it's going to do. The breaks are obvious, and I will say I went through a kind of 2-hour stretch period where I was just my short game and my putting, my feel. I joked. I think I chipped in at least once. I hold a flop shot on one hole. Joked to my caddy and Justin Rose that I was like Seve, you know, with his 6-piece symphony.
Yeah.
The listeners must be thinking, who is this guy you've got on, John? But, you know, I just stepped over that putt and I just had such a good feel for the greens, the way it was all going. And, just knocked up there and it kind of went in. It was, it all seemed pretty easy at that point.
We need to talk about the state of the game at the moment. You know, this probably won't appear for public consumption for a little while, but we can talk about the Live Golf saga in kind of general terms, at least. You've been quite outspoken on this, and I know maybe your best friend and certainly on tour, Laurie Cantor, has made the jump, and I spoke to him at Centurion at the first event. And I asked him about how it affected his relationship with you, and he didn't want to touch it, which is obviously fine. It's his business, your business as well. But it seemed to me that it had an effect on your friendship. Is that fair to say? And in a negative way, obviously.
Yeah, I think it has. I mean, you know, it has. Listen, I think there's no way of beating around the bush. You know, it's his career, and we all make our own career decisions, right? I fully respect that, and you know, it's not a decision that I would have made. It's not something I would have done, but you know, that's not that isn't. Yeah, I mean, there's not really a lot else to say on that.
I mean, it's your business. I mean, it's a touchy subject. This, I mean, say as much as you want to say, or as little as you want. I mean, as I say, it's your own life that you're talking about.
Yeah. No, listen, I think, you know, there's not really a lot else to say on that. I mean, it's, you know, I have an opinion on, and Laurie obviously falls into this group of players and there's a number of them, right? You know, and I've expressed opinions on it all, you know, on Twitter or whatnot, or interviews before, about what I think their decisions mean, what it shows, and ultimately I think it's disappointing, you know. There are things that can be improved on both tours, but the way to improve them isn't to, I don't think, go and play Live Golf. And, you know, Laurie doesn't fit into the group of players, in my mind anyway, that have gone. That was the surprising element to me.
Mm-hmm. Were you surprised when he said he was doing it?
Well, yes and no. I mean, I was, because it's not something that I would have thought any player in Laurie's position, and there's a few that have gone, need to do. You know, they're very much on the upside. There's lots to look forward to. You know, to me, I couldn't quite fathom making that choice, but equally, I recognise that's a decision he can make and they can all make. But you know, at the same time, I know he's part of a management group where they've all gone. Yeah. And this is something that is a feature of Live Golf. You know, you've got a quite a significant, minority really, who have come from a very small, 2 management companies. I mean, you know, I think there's an element of groupthink going on here. And ironically, the criticisms are all the same, whether it's of Keith Pelley or the tours. And I think, well, how original are those thoughts? You're all saying the same thing. I don't know why you're saying those things, especially as it relates to a couple, because a couple of the players have benefited enormously in different ways from the tours, whether it be through the pandemic or over the years. And I don't respect that opinion. I don't respect their opinions of Keith or the tour. And I've definitely lost respect personally for them all for going. But, you know, that doesn't necessarily mean a friendship has to be over as it relates to Laurie or whatnot. But I do think, you know, they've probably lost as much respect for some of the things I've said as I've lost for the actions they've taken. That's the reality.
I think the agents thing is interesting. I mean, I was at the event at Centurion as a reporter, I hasten to add, we were paying our own way, et cetera, as was the case when I went to Saudi Arabia in February. I mean, I think I was the only journalist there who did pay, where the company I worked for paid for everything. But it was very noticeable at Centurion that just about every agent I can think of was there, whether they had a player in the field or not. And maybe you can argue that's them doing their job, because they have to look at all possibilities for their clients and et cetera. But it made me laugh. I mean, they were all there, as I say, sniffing around. And I think the word insidious almost comes to mind, their influence on this, because there's a lot of money to be made for them. Obviously, their percentage, whatever it may be, is going to be significant, given the numbers that we've seen bandied about. And, ultimately, I've lost a bit of respect. You said that, you used that phrase. I've lost a bit of respect for the people who haven't just come out and said, I'm doing this for money. This is too much money for me to turn down, and I'm going to do it. It's really that simple, is it not?
Yeah, I mean, I think to a person, there's nothing more to it than the money. I'd certainly be interested to hear the arguments beyond that. Yeah, I agree with you, John. There are ultimately a group of people involved here who are set to make a ton of money, and I don't think actually have any care or regard for the game of golf on the whole. No. So the question then is this a good thing? And that's the question I keep asking myself. Ultimately, the answer I keep coming up against is probably not on balance. And, that's why I would personally, I agree with the stance that both the European Tour or the DP World Tour and the PGA Tour have taken in coming together. I mean, and beyond that, if I'm going to use the word custodian of the game, or I'm somewhat responsible for the future of the professional game, it's not just as simple as saying, well, we should just, we have to cooperate and incorporate Live Golf, because it doesn't seem apparent that they really want that anyway. They've got their own vision of what they want to achieve. The PGA Tour have got their own vision, as has the DP World Tour, and it's very, I think when you lay it all out, it's going to be impossible for three entities to coexist in a way that's going to serve the sponsors of each individual tour, well, and the investment, guarantee investment I just don't see how it's going to happen.
It's my kind of hope that it'll all work out in the end, because they're going to have to start talking at some point. I mean, and I've likened this in a column that I've written to politics with Northern Ireland. Ultimately, the Unionists and Sinn Féin had to sit down at the same table and talk, and they both had to make big compromises to come out of it, to create peace in that lovely part of the world. That to me is inevitably what's going to have to happen here too. I mean, it can't just go on and on and on, and the game just implodes, because that's not good for anybody.
No, it isn't good for anybody. And listen, I don't know what's going to happen, and may well be the outcome.
But that's my hope.
Yeah, I suppose mine too. I mean, it'd just be interesting to see. I think Live Golf are trying to, like Keith said in his chat in Ireland to us all. It's not like there wasn't offers on the table. They were offered to be part of the ecosystem that is professional golf, right? But that is an ecosystem, and I think they want, Live Golf wants to be something quite significant, or very significant, and that's going to have negative ramifications on the current ecosystem. I don't think it's possible the pie can just grow. I don't think this is just going to continue to be an additional layer to the pie that is professional golf. I could be wrong on that front.
Well, I take the view on that. There are aspects of certainly the PGA Tour and the DP World Tour where it's a kind of tired product in many weeks. I mean, and you wonder how attractive that those tumbleweed weeks, if you can call them that, we're going to be to sponsors going forward. So I think there is room if you wanted to kill off a lot of certainly use the PGA Tour as an example, kill off the fall season part of the year where the big names basically don't play. And it's basically they're feeding the rank and file. They're giving them opportunities to play, which is part of being the tour. But there was too much of that. There was too many weeks where I wasn't interested, and maybe you were the same.
Yeah, and listen, this is where the wider discussion can be had. Listen, golf, like any society, it's about weighing up the product versus the distribution of something. And ultimately, we're talking about the distribution of wealth here. Now, I've always made the argument golf does a uniquely good job, certainly from an individual sports perspective, of distributing wealth quite broadly across a few hundred players per year globally.
Yeah.
Compare that to tennis, it's a very different problem that we're both facing. Now, I think every sport, whether it's tennis, golf, or whatever it is, we're all confronting the same problem, and that is, generally speaking, overconsumption. So we all feel stale. There's a feeling amongst everyone. And this relates to football too. No sport is impervious to this at the moment. But then, obviously, the question is, how do we move forward? How do we improve that balance, if you like? And clearly, there is a desire to improve the product of professional golf. And that probably does look like a world tour or something more like that, right? The top guys coming together more frequently. But ultimately, there will be the net effect of that, in my opinion, is that you will shrink the pool of players that earn, let's just say, that clear six figures a year, right? Let's just say, I think that pool of people will be shrunk. Now, I'm not against that happening, but what I would say is Live Golf goes too far in that direction, in that there's 48 guys, deeply unmeritocratic. I don't know how we're going to recycle in and out of that. Now, of course, you could argue over time there'll be ways in and out of that, but I just go back to what happens, what we see in wider society, where, we know wealth doesn't generally distribute. It doesn't trickle down very well. So if you put all the money in the hands of the top 48, well, generally speaking, that's fine. But you're going to want to get, all the corporations are going to want to be involved with that product. So I think the net effect will just be that the wealth gets distributed into the hands of fewer and fewer people. And I think it's going to go too far in the other direction. And I don't think that's actually what we need as a sport, or should want, as a sport. So that's my personal opinion on it in a broader context. And that's why, I'm one of the fundamental reasons why I was kind of, spoken out against it. Doesn't mean to say I hate the concept or I don't think it's got some valuable ideas to it. Of course I do. And I've spoken to a few players lately, senior players too. And I do think now the time has come for the DP World Tour to reduce its fields, to reduce the amount of events, to pay players if they're missing a cut, and to try and up the prize funds. And I think that is going to be an evolution if it happens, will be a byproduct of Live Golf coming on the scene. It's going to be a positive thing for this tour. But I do think that time has come where we need to do more of what you've just said and get rid of some of the events.
Yeah, I do think that there's inevitability to the franchise idea that the players are going to be actually contracted to each tour. They're going to be run like they do in other sports. You're going to be, like Formula One almost. If you're doing Formula One, that everybody's going to be there, and that's going to be the future. You're going to have to be able to guarantee a certain number of big name players to go forward. They'll have to be contracted to do that.
Yeah, yeah, that could. That could well be the case. I don't know, but I know one thing's for sure, that these players they're not more independent for going to Live. They're far less independent. And,
there's been some nonsense talked and that stuff.
They are, I do think it's interesting to touch on. I think Saudi Arabia are going to be heavily involved in the next 5 years in the global economy, not just, golf. We're talking about, I noticed obviously they've bought Newcastle United. They've bought a major stake in Aston Martin. They are buying up assets globally, because that's what they want to do. They've got a lot of capital to spend globally, and they're going to do it. I think they're going to do to the world what China did post 2008. And China haven't got the capacity to do it now. The Middle East is going to be an interesting battlefront, if you like, the next 5 years geopolitically. And I think Saudi Arabia is going to be a feature of the global economy, and this is just going to be part of it. And so they are buying up assets when they're buying up Phil Mickelson for 200 million. Now, I think they're overpaying on a grand scale, but it doesn't matter what I think, because they've got the cash to do it, and they're going to do it. But ultimately, I think that's what they're seeing this as. They're seeing this as just one big asset. They're throwing money around left, right, and center. And, these golfers, they're not individual contractors at this point. They're effectively employees of the public investment fund of Saudi Arabia, and they're going to be at their beck and call for as long as the contract they've signed. And so, that's fine. But that basically means in 2 years' time or next year, they're going to be playing 14 events plus the 4 majors if they get in them. That's 18 events. Does anyone really think that they're then going to go and play 6 events on each tour? And this is why I don't think it can coexist, because the PGA Tour aren't going to be satisfied.
Not as it stands, no.
Not as it stands. So there's going to have, compromises, to your point, are going to have to be made. I can't see Live making them, personally. So
they might be in a position where they feel like they don't have to.
Right. And that might well be the case. So then the question is, what's going to happen outside of that? And I think clearly, what's going to happen is what is happening. And that's the two other main tours coming together.
The thing is, though, if you truly believe that, the stuff that Greg Norman comes out with about, growing the game and all the rest of it, that they should make compromises if that's what they truly believe.
Yeah. But I think we would probably both agree.
Well, I'm not sure it's going to happen.
No,
and their whole thing's going to have to evolve. I mean, competitive golf isn't supposed to be a democracy, far from it. But they've got the point now where your mate Laurie Cantor might be one of these. He might, if they keep signing people, he might just get eased out if they stick to the 48-player field thing. He could be Asian Tour might be where he has to play after that, because I mean, right now, if you look at the scores that the guys have been producing in these 2 or 3 events that they've had already, I mean, Graham McDowell and Phil Mickelson are the two that come immediately to mind. I mean, they've signed up guys, the lower ranked guys or lesser names. They're getting to play instead of the guys who've been playing much better golf in the 2 events they've had. They're getting eased out. They're, in fact, maybe not even getting to play at all. But Phil Mickelson's still there, and he's played rubbish so far. And as has Graham McDowell. I mean, they've been awful, but they're still in the field. Whereas guys there was a guy I think finished 5th in one event, and he's out.
Right.
So I mean, that's not got a place in golf either. I don't think.
No. Well, it's an exhibition, isn't it? In almost every sense of the word. And, I struggle to see how it grows the game in any positive way. I just don't see how it happens. But, I don't know. I think they're trying to just come up with they're trying to reshape, the game of golf. And again, it goes back to the point of, is that actually what we need? Is that what the game of golf needs? Is this what we want? Do we want the professional game or a large majority of the professional game, owned by a sovereign wealth fund, spearheaded by a guy who simply hates the PGA Tour for whatever reason? Could be valid, could be non-valid, I haven't a clue. And played by a group of guys where there's not a lot of recycling going on, and it feels very exhibition. I personally don't think that is a progression in any way, shape or form. And of course, that's, it wouldn't end up that way ultimately, but I don't know, John, I haven't got much positive to say about it, as you can probably tell.
That's all right. I mean, I think that Greg Norman is part of the problem, in the sense that, as you just touched on, he's got a real issue with the PGA Tour. It goes back, many years now. And if I do think there's a real possibility, if it had been somebody else heading this thing up other than him, that Jay Monahan would have talked to this person at the beginning of it and maybe worked something out. Whereas they just went, Greg Norman, we're not even going to talk to him. But that was maybe, I'm just speculating, but that to me sounds like a fairly likely scenario right at the beginning of this.
Possibly, but then I haven't heard anyone that reasonable support it, and that's the point I would make. Who's actually going to support these ideas? And no disrespect, well, it's not about respect.
Well, it might have been they might have come at it with a different proposal. I don't know.
They might have done, but I think
if Jay Monahan had said, "Well, okay, but what if we do this?" And they went away. Maybe we should do that rather than what we've come. Who knows?
Yeah. Well, I think that's a fair point. But it goes to the point that this is an aggressive action that they're taking, and that's why I don't think there's going to be a lot of compromise on the live golf front. And so, we have to confront that reality, I think.
I do think if they see what you think of this, if they do sit down, which I do think is inevitable, one consequence of it might be that Monahan, Pelly and Norman are all out. That could be part of the deal, that they're all gone. We wipe the slate clean and off we go in a different direction.
Well, interesting. I mean, then would you have 3 different new people come in, or one person to oversee them?
Well, who knows? I mean, all of the above possibilities, yeah.
Well, yeah.
It's just how, you know more about, you've studied big business more than I have, but that seems to me that's what happens, is that the guys at the top are the most vulnerable almost.
Well, yeah, I mean, if we're talking about, like a merger and acquisition, then obviously you can, I could see that, right? But I struggle to see how that's going to happen. I do. I mean, I have heard rumors of the PGL, which is another thing to throw into the mix. I have heard it from, not the horse's mouth, but I've heard it in person, that there are still progressions and discussions happening on that front, big involvement from, big corporate interests, kind of private equity types. And so, there's a whole host of potential disruption, even more in the pipeline. I mean, you wonder where it's going to stop, but, I ultimately, I suppose I worry for the game, because you have interests, let's say, who are interested in mostly one thing, profit, or in the case of maybe the Saudis, just becoming more involved in something that they have a small interest in, and they think is going to globally, improve their, whatever you want to call it. But I don't think it's for the good of the game professionally, on the whole. And that's the thing that would concern me more than anything. And ultimately, though, there are no, it is fairly open and democratic in that anything can happen. There are really no legal boundaries I'm aware of here that's stopping any of this happening. It's just, it's where we go from here. And I struggle this is where I'm disappointed with some of the comments that some of the professionals have made as it relates to either tour, especially the PGA Tour, where they're highly critical of it. And I think, well, you haven't done badly. You've done very, very well. And I hear, them complaining about maybe not earning as much relative to other sports, but you can have a 25-year career in golf. You can't have a 25-year career in the NBA. So, the earnings are all condensed in different ways, and, golfers are doing very, very well. So I struggle financially. So I just have a hard time putting it into perspective in my own mind and kind of coming on board with the opinions that the majority of them, frankly, have spoken, or said publicly.
How do you see the role of the majors in all of this? Excuse me.
Well, I mean, they're going to be crucial. The world rankings are going to be very interesting. I've spoken to a few people about it, and it seems to me as though the world ranking points, even if they are offered, they're going to be offered in a limited way, and they're not going to be in for a good while. So, the world rankings are going to, of the players that have gone, they're all going to fall. Again, rumors that I kind of hear, the majors are fully supportive of both the DP World Tour and the PGA Tour. And I think that there is a bit of a coming together of, these people, and a bit like a tortoise kind of just going into its shell and just saying, well, this is a storm we might need to weather for a couple of years. We're going to come together. We think that we need to, for the good of the game, quote unquote, and see what happens to live in 2 years. And I don't know. I'm not saying that's the right strategy, but I probably would agree with that, certainly as I sit here right now. So maybe there is some of that going on. But then again, I say that as, we're mid-July, and as of yet, I still don't think a critical mass of people have gone across to live golf. So I think it's easy for me to say that. If we start talking,
there is a tipping point with the world rankings, though, isn't there?
There is a tipping point, and if we start seeing people like Cam Smith or Hideki or Cantlay, and I'm just rumouring, they're just rumoured names, right? Yeah. All of a sudden, then we are entering that very grey point and potentially that tipping point where you go, okay, right now. But I don't think we're there yet. And
because the world rankings would inevitably reach the point where they just look a bit silly if they didn't, recognise what's going on. So
yeah, and I think also the reputational. I mean, the majority of guys who have gone, they kind of fit into a box, right? They're towards the end of their careers. They've been great players. I respect them all as golfers. I love their games and admire them greatly, but they, generally speaking, do fit into, a box apart from maybe 2 or 3 guys. And I think that's fine. I think a lot of people can see it for what it is at this point. But obviously, if we're talking, if like the names I just mentioned, if they start going across, then golf does have an issue because you're losing some of the current best players. And at the moment, other than Dustin and obviously Bryson, I think they're the only 2 current golfers who I think are really world class or able to compete regularly in majors.
Yeah. And I mean, as we speak, things might have changed by the time people hear this, but the European Ryder Cup team, or the probable, possible, potential Ryder Cup team for next year, is relatively unscathed at this point. I mean, Sergio and Casey maybe had one more in them, but the rest of them, they weren't going to be in the team next year. That's gone so far.
Yeah, I would agree with that. The Americans seem to be more harmed.
And they've got a bigger squad as well.
Yeah, and then of course you think about the guys who have been doing well this year. Zalatoris, Cameron Young. They are not short on world-class golfing talent, and I still would fancy them ahead of us in Italy.
Yeah.
But I think I agree with you on the playing front. And I know there's been some, talk about friendships. There's been some definite dislocations of friendships, at the high level in European golf as well. So that's going to have an impact on involvement, and it's going to be interesting to see what happens on that front.
Yeah, I mean, this might be old news by the time this thing comes out, but what was been the reaction on tour to the Henrik Stenson resignation, removal, whatever you want to call it?
I think just one of huge disappointment, that he would take the role knowing that he's going to sign with Liv. He was one of the early names. Everyone kind of thought, well, he's going to Liv.
Yeah.
I was shocked when he took the captaincy because I figured, well, maybe he isn't going to Liv. Maybe Liv is dead in the water, and so to do what he's done, I just think is ultimately just really, really disappointing. And that's kind of why I singled him out on Twitter. I haven't personally responded to anyone on Twitter about it all, but I did to him not because he signed it with Liv, but because he's taken the captaincy and he's shown just, I think, a huge amount of disrespect for that role. And that is a crucial role from the European Tour's perspective. And you would think, or hope anyway, from any golfer's perspective, there aren't many greater honours you can get. So, as I said, it's not all that surprising because I think he does fit into the mould of guys that have gone across, in that what matters more than anything is this, the amount of zeros in the bank account, and that's pretty much it. So
there's a terrible conspiracy theory, of course, that he took the job to up the money, that make himself more valuable, which I hope that's not true. But it's, it certainly did make him more valuable to Liv. I mean, Henrik, Ryder Cup captain, was more valuable than just Henrik.
Yeah, I've spoken to, I know a Swedish player who thinks that is what he did. So, and he's not particularly conspiratorial or outspoken about anything. This lad I spoke to about it or heard it, kind of through someone from. But, I wouldn't be surprised, because at the same time, this is the level we're on. Henrik and they all know who they're dealing with. So if you can negotiate an extra 20 million, you will, I think, explore, some new depravity to get that because it's on offer. We're not doing business. They're not doing business with, people that play under the same rules or with the same cultural kind of boundaries that we do. This is the Saudi Arabians. And now that's not to be overly derogatory towards the Saudi Arabians, but that's just what they're like. And, this is the level we're at with the professional game of golf. And I don't think it's a level that I think's something we should be celebrating, and Henrik and Phil, they knew the game they were playing. And of course they've done well out of it. This is if Henrik was playing that game, right? They all knew what they were doing if they're doing that, and you can blame them. But it's a bit like politics. It's a bit like Trump in politics. You just degrade the quality of, whatever it is, the conversation or where conversations happen. And that's where we're heading in the game of golf. And that's unfortunate.
Just to round this off and go off at a slight tangent, are you happy with the DP World deal with the PGA Tour going forward? Is that good, bad, indifferent? Where do you stand on that?
Well, I don't think they were left with any other option, really. I mean, it was obviously that or, go full on board with the live golf. But as you can tell from listening to me speak, that I think would have been a mistake. And I think Keith was ultimately, again, back to what we said earlier, Keith as the CEO of the tour, he's employed to make that judgment call. And I agree with him that, that ultimately confronted with those two options, you need to get closer with the PGA Tour. I think getting 10 spots on the, into America from next year onwards, I think is a big deal. If it were me personally now looking at it, I would try if I could to make the events smaller, improve the prize funds, make fewer events, make the experience play on the European Tour as good as I can, and offering those 10 spots to the PGA Tour, I think offers enough for guys like Rafa Cabrera-Bello, Matthias Schwab, Kiradach Efibarmrat, guys who are very good players who want to go clearly play in America, but maybe haven't got their PGA Tour card to choose the European Tour. Tom Lewis would be an option rather than choosing the Korn Ferry Tour. They come and play on the European Tour again, and they up our quality of fields. And I know the world rankings aren't going to be reflected because of the changes that are occurring, but there are still some very good young players around the world who, could come and they may be ranked 150th in the world, but if you saw them play 4 days in a golf tournament, they are impressive. Yeah. So we do have the possibility, I still think, to offer up a great product. I think we're going to have to make the changes to do so. And I think the 10 spots ultimately should hopefully aid that.
Just to be devil's advocate for a minute, I've talked to more than one sort of retired European Tour player has said the same thing to me, that they can't get their heads around this 10 spot thing because as one player said to me, what other business gives away its 10 best assets at the end of every year?
Well, it's only given them the option. I mean, if it were me, for example, who got one of those 10, I wouldn't go and take the 10. I would still play full time in Europe because I don't want to play full time in America.
Right.
So there's that. But also remember, there's going to be people that come off of the PGA Tour too. And so obviously
they'll come back.
Yeah.
They won't make it.
So there is a kind of natural recycling going on. And, if ultimately, if the overall pot is being improved by guys, if there's 30 guys that choose to play in Europe, we might lose our best 10, but we're still gaining a good mass of players who I think are probably better than what we've got currently on show. So, I think, listen, there isn't a perfect world, right? There's no perfect, we've had to make compromises and that's one of them. You could see it that way, or you could see it the way I suppose, trying to advertise it as a little bit more of, but, these aren't perfect. We don't live in a perfect world now, obviously in the golfing front, and we're having to make decisions as a tour, or the executive is, that they feels best in our best interest. So, I mean, it's, I do support what they've done, and, I think at least it guarantees, for the foreseeable anyway, with the help of the PGA Tour, some good investment.
Right. Enough of that nonsense. Let's get to the important stuff. We're going to finish off this podcast with a few minutes of talking about your dogs. They're far more important. They're fascinating beasts. Obviously, you're clearly besotted just by your social media interaction you have with them. Talk to us a bit about your dogs, just to lighten the mood before we finish.
Yeah. Well, a couple of pointers. One's Gus. He's a Vizsla, and Pip is a German short-haired pointer. Yeah. So we got Gus in 2017, and as soon as we moved, me and Jen, to a house, we got Gus immediately. He's from Aberystwyth. Got him on a farm.
Welsh.
He's Welsh. They're both Welsh. He's Pip's from Merthyr Tydfil. So
do they have Welsh accents, dogs? How does that work?
Don't know. They're both pretty friendly, so that's something that does run through the Welsh usually.
Good singers, then.
Yeah, yeah. We've always loved dogs. We've always loved. I'm going to use the phrase proper dogs. That probably are too big to sit on your lap, but I mean, out on a walk, they're great. Especially Pip. I mean, Pip's got a real streak in her. Gus is, from a farm, and he kind of grew up with the tennis ball, so he's happy just chasing after that and being pretty close to you. But Pip, on a walk, she's like a wild animal. So we've had some moments with her where, she shocked me a bit, but it's in her nature. And I do love that. I love watching a dog, behave like a dog, really. And, they're both great. So, I enjoy spending time with them, obviously, when I'm home, and miss them when I'm away a bit, but,
And you've sold your apartment in Edinburgh, have you? I mean, I was very impressed when you moved, you saw the light and were thinking of, living in Scotland at least some of the year.
I could live in Scotland full time, but it wouldn't probably work out at the moment. But we didn't sell it in the end. We're just renting it out now. So we had it on the market for a while, but we didn't sell it. And I think the market is, from what I'm hearing, slowed significantly up here, and things are just harder to sell, especially flats. But we're renting out, and it's a shame, but we're looking to move down south, so we kind of wanted to get some of the money out of it, but we'll just rent it out for a while and leave it at that, and it also gives us the option to come up here a bit more as well, so and use it, because we're not going to do a full-time tenancy agreement with it, but we love Edinburgh. We love Scotland, but especially Edinburgh. It's such a great city, and
well, it's home of the Hibs, the top football team in Scotland, obviously,
Yeah, I can't say I know much about Hibs and Hearts. They both Edinburgh? Hearts, Edinburgh? Yeah.
Goodness me.
Yeah.
You need some educating.
No, I just like the food. The food in Edinburgh, the beaches, the food, and a bit of golf, obviously. We've got some good friends up here. So, Scotland is just a beautiful country.
Yeah. On that note, Eddie, thank you for your time. It's been a pleasure. I'm now going to spend the next half an hour educating Eddie about the football teams in Edinburgh. But again, thanks for your time.
No worries. Cheers, John.
Cheers.
He's an engaging chap, isn't he? And as noted in the interview there, Eddie's game is coming back around. And that's a good thing for golf. And Eddie Pepperell in contention is an Eddie Pepperell we'd like to see. What's also good for and about golf is the lifelong nature of it. And on our next, we'll catch up with one of the game's most respected long-time coaches.
Part of my teaching was very quickly to understand that you can't teach anything. You teach the one person who's standing in front of you at that time. You can't teach him what's written in a book or what everybody thinks is correct, because the only thing that's correct is what works for you.
That's the legend that is Alex Mercer, next time on The Thing About Golf.